Continuing Pericles from Plutarch's Lives, translated by John Dryden, revised by Arthur Hugh Clough. Their treaties and alliances, power, empire, peace, and war, their wealth and their success forevermore. And the start of that was the tribute of the cities, and with them the cities too, to do with them as he pleases and undo, to build up, if he likes, stone walls around a town, and again, if so he likes, to pull them down. And that was Teleclides. Nor was all this the luck of some happy occasion, nor was it the mere bloom and grace of a policy that flourished for a season, but having for 40 years together maintained the first place among statesmen such as Ephialtes and Leocrates and Muronides and Cimon and Ptolemaidas and Thucydides were, after the defeat and the banishment of Thucydides, for no less than 15 years longer in the exercise of one continuous, unintermitted command in the office to which he was annually re-elected. Of general, he preserved his integrity unspotted, though otherwise he was not altogether idle or careless in looking after his pecuniary advantage, his paternal estate, which of right belonged to him, so he ordered that it might neither through negligence be wasted or lessened, nor yet, being so full of business as he was, cost him any great trouble or time with taking care of it, and put it into such a way of management as he thought to be the most easy for himself and the most exact. All his yearly products and profits he sold together in a lump, and supplied his household needs afterwards by buying everything that he or his family wanted out of the market, upon which account his children, when they grew to age, were not well pleased with his management, and the women that lived with him were treated with little cost, and complained of his way of housekeeping, where everything was ordered and set down from day to day and reduced to the greatest exactness, since there was not there, as is usual in a great family and a plentiful estate, anything to spare or over and above, but all that went out or came in, all disbursements and all receipts, proceeded as it were by number and measure. His manager in all this was a single servant, Evangelist by name, a man either naturally gifted or instructed by Pericles, so as to excel every one in this art of domestic economy. All this, in truth, was very little in harmony with Anaxagoras's wisdom, if indeed it be true that he, by a kind of divine impulse and greatness of spirit, voluntarily quitted his house, and left his land to lie fallow and to be grazed by sheep like a common. But the life of a contemplative philosopher and that of an active statesman are, I presume, not the same thing, for the one merely employs upon great good objects of thought and intelligence that requires no aid of instruments nor supply of any external materials, whereas the other who tempers and applies his virtue to human uses may have occasion for affluence, not as a matter of necessity but as a noble thing, which was Pericles' case, who relieved numerous poor citizens. However, there is a story that Anaxagoras himself, while Pericles was taken up with public affairs, lay neglected, and then, being grown old, he wrapped himself up with the resolution to die, for want of food, which, being by chance brought to Pericles' ear, he was horror-struck, and instantly ran thither, and used all the arguments and entreaties he could to him, lamenting not so much Anaxagoras' condition as his own, should he lose such a counselor as he found him to be, and that upon this Anaxagoras unfolded his robe, and showing himself made answer, Pericles, said he, even those who have occasion for a lamp supply it with oil. The Lacedaemonians beginning to show themselves troubled at the growth of the Athenian power. Pericles, on the other hand, to elevate the people's spirit yet more, and to raise them to the thought of great actions, proposed a decree to summon all the Greeks in what part soever, whether of Europe or Asia, every city, little as well as great, to send their deputies to Athens, to a general assembly or convention, there to consult and advise concerning the Greek temples which the barbarians had burnt down, and the sacrifices which were due from them upon the vows they had made to to what they considered to be gods and goddesses, for the safety of Greece when they fought against the barbarians, and concerning the navigation of the sea, that they might be henceforward passed to and fro, and trade securely, and be at peace among themselves. Now, by barbarians, of course, they mean the people who don't speak one of their languages, which is, well, more modernly, it's a problem to say it that way. But upon this errand, there were 20 men of such as were above 50 years of age, sent by commission, 5 to summon the Ionians and Dorians in Asia, not the same thing as the continent Asia, and the islanders as far as Lesbos and Rhodes, 5 to visit all the places in Hellespont and Thrace up to Byzantium, and the other 5 besides these to go to Boeotia and Phocis and Peloponnesus, and from hence to pass through the Locrians over to the neighboring continent as far as Acarnania and Ambracia, and the rest to take their course through Euboea to the Aetans and the Malian Gulf, and to the Achaeans of Phthiotis, and the Thessalians, all of them to treat with the people as they passed, and persuaded them to come and take their part in the debates for settling the peace and jointly regulating the affairs of Greece. Nothing was effected, nor did the cities meet by their deputies, as was desired. The Lacedaemonians, as it is said, crossing the design underhand, and the attempt being disappointed and baffled, first in Peloponnesus, I thought fit, however, to introduce the mention of it, to show the spirit of the man and the greatness of his thoughts. In his military conduct he gained a great reputation for wariness. He would not by his good will engage in any fight which had much uncertainty or hazard. He did not envy the glory of generals whose rash adventures fortune favored with brilliant success, however they were admired by others, nor did he think them worthy his imitation, but always used to say to his citizens that, so far as lay in his power, they should continue immortal and live forever, seeing Ptolemydas, the son of Ptolemais, upon the confidence of his former success, and flushed with the honor of his military actions, had procured him, making preparations to attack the Boeotians in their own country, where there was no likely opportunity, and that he had prevailed with the bravest and most enterprising of the youth to enlist themselves as volunteers in the service, who, besides his other force made up 1,000, he endeavored to withhold him and to advise him from it in the public assembly, telling him in a memorial saying of his, which still goes about, that if he would not take Pericles' advice, yet he would not do amiss to wait and be ruled by time, the wisest counselor of all. This saying, at that time, was but slightly commended, but within a few days after, when news is brought to Ptolemydas himself, that Ptolemydas himself had been defeated and slain in battle near Coronea, and that many brave citizens had fallen with him, it gained him great repute, as well as a good will among the people, for wisdom and for love of his countrymen. But all of his expeditions, that to the Chersonese gave most satisfaction and pleasure, having proved the safety of the Greeks who inhabited there, for not only by carrying along with them 1,000 fresh citizens of Athens, he gave new strength and vigor to the cities, but also by belting the neck of the land, which joins the peninsula to the continent, with bulwarks and forts from sea to sea. He put a stop to the inroads of the Thracians, who lay about the Chersonese, and closed the door against a continual and grievous war, with which that country had been long harassed, lying exposed to the encroachments and influx of barbarous neighbors, and groaning under the evils of a predatory population, both upon and within its borders. Nor was he less admired and talked of abroad for his sailing around the Peloponnesus, having set out from Pegae, or the fountains, the port of Megara, with 100 galleys, for he not only laid waste the sea coast, as Ptolemais had done before, but also advancing far up into the mainland with the soldiers he had on board. By the terror of his appearance, drove many within their walls, and at Nemea, with main force, routed and raised a trophy over the Onians, who stood their ground and joined battle with him, and having taken on board a supply of soldiers into the galley out of Achaia, and then in league with Athens, crossed with the fleet to the opposite continent, and sailing along by the mouth of the river Achelous, I guess, because overran Acarnania, and shut up the Enneada within their city walls, and having ravaged and wasted their country, weighed anchor for home, with the double advantage of having shown himself formidable to his enemies, and at the same time safe and energetic to his fellow citizens, for there was not so much as any chance miscarriage that happened the whole voyage through to those who were under his charge, entering also the Euxine Sea with a large and finely equipped fleet. He obtained for Greek cities any new arrangements they wanted, and entered into friendly relations with them, and to the barbarous nations and kings and chiefs round about them, displayed the greatness of the power of the Athenians, their perfect ability and confidence to sail wherever they had a mind, and to bring the whole sea under their control. He left the Sinopians 13 ships of war, with soldiers under the command of Lamachus, to assist them against Themistilius the tyrant, and when he and his accomplices had been thrown out, obtained a decree that 600 of the Athenians that were willing should sail to Sinope, and plant themselves there with the Sinopians, sharing among them the houses and land which the tyrant and his party had previously held. But in other things he did not comply with the giddy impulses of the citizens, nor quit his own resolutions to follow their fancies. When carried away with the thought of their strength and great success, they were eager to interfere again in Egypt, and to disturb the king of Persia's maritime dominions. Nay, there were a good many who were even then possessed with the unblessed and inauspicious passion for Sicily, which afterwards the orators of Alcibiades' party the orators of Alcibiades' party blew up into a flame. There were some also who dreamt of Tuscany and Carthage, and not without plausible reason, in their present large dominion and prosperous course of their affairs. But Pericles curbed this passion for foreign conquest, and unsparingly pruned and cut down their ever-busy fancies for a multitude of undertakings, and directed their power for the most part to securing and consolidating what they had already got, supposing it would be quite enough for them to do so, if they could keep the Lacedaemonians in check, to whom he entertained all things a sense of opposition, which, as upon many other occasions, so particularly showed by what he did in the time of the Holy War, the Lacedaemonians having gone with an army to Delphi, restored Apollo's temple, which the Phocians had got into their possession, to the Delphians. Immediately after the departure, Pericles with another army came and restored the Phocians, and the Lacedaemonians, having engraven the record of their privilege of consulting the oracle before others, which the Delphians gave them, upon the forehead of the brazen wolf which stands there, he having received from the Phocians the like privilege for the Athenians, had it cut upon the same wolf of brass on his right side. This is usually the time I eat breakfast, so my stomach's rumbling, that's why. That he did well and wisely in thus restraining the exhortations of the Athenians within the compass of Greece. The events themselves that happened afterward bore sufficient witness, for in the first place the Euboeans revolted, against whom he passed over with forces, and immediately after news came that the Megarians were turning their enemies, and a hostile army was upon the borders of Attica, under the conduct of Cleitoanax, king of the Lacedaemonians. Wherefore Pericles came with his army back again in all haste out of Euboea to make the war which threatened at home, and did not venture to engage a numerous and brave army eager for battle, but perceiving that Cleitoanax was a very young man, and governed himself mostly by the counsel and advice of Cleandrides, whom the Ephors had sent with him by reason of his youth, to be a kind of guardian and assistant to him, he privately made a trial of the man's integrity, and in a short time, having corrupted with money, prevailed with him to withdraw the Peloponnesians out of Attica. When the army had retired and dispersed into the several states, the Lacedaemonians, in anger, fined their king in so large a sum of money that, unable to pay it, he quitted Lacedaemon, while Cleandrides fled, and had a sentence of death passed upon him in his absence. This was the father of Gylippus, who overpowered the Athenians in Sicily, and it seemed that this covetousness was a hereditary disease transmitted from father to son, for Gylippus, who afterwards was caught in foul practices, and expelled from Sparta for it. But this we have told at large in the account of Lysander. That one's to come, isn't it? I don't have the Greek characters for a lot of these, so if I'm mispronouncing, that's why. When Pericles, in giving up his accounts of this expedition, stated a disbursement of 10 talents as laid out upon fit occasion, the people, without any question, nor troubling themselves to investigate the mystery, freely allowed of it, and some historians, in which number is Theophrastus the philosopher, have given it as a truth that Pericles every year used to send privately the sum of 10 talents to Sparta, with which he complimented those in office to keep off the war, not to purchase peace neither, but time, that he might prepare at leisure, and be the better able to carry on the war hereafter. Immediately after this, turning his forces against the revolters, and passing over into the island of Euboea with 50 sail of ship and 5,000 men in arms, he reduced their cities and drove out the citizens of the Chalcidians, called Hippobata, horse feeders, the chief persons for wealth and reputation among them, and removing all the Histiaans out of the country, brought in a plantation of Athenians in their room, making them his one example of severity, because they had captured an Attic ship and killed all on board. After this, having made a truce between the Athenians and the Lacedaemonians for 30 years, he ordered by public decree the expedition against the Isle of Samos on the ground that, when they were bid to leave off the war with the Milesians, they had not compiled, and as these measures against the Samians are thought to have been taken to please Aspasia, this may be a fit point for inquiry about the woman. What art or charming faculty she had that enabled her to captivate, as she did, the greatest statesman, and to give the philosophers occasion to speak so much about her, and that, too, not to her disparagement, that she was a Milesian by birth, the daughter of Axiochus, is a thing acknowledged, and they say it was in emulation of Thargelia, a courtesan of the old Aeonian times, that she made her addresses to men of great power. Thargelia was a great beauty, extremely charming, and at the same time sagacious. She had numerous suitors among the Greeks, and brought all who had to do with her over to the Persian interest, and by their means, being men of the greatest power and station, sowed the seeds of the Median faction up and down in several cities. Aspasia, some say, was courted and caressed by Pericles upon account of her knowledge and skill in politics. Socrates himself would sometimes go to visit her, and some of his acquaintance with him, and those who frequented her company would carry their wives with them to listen to her. Her occupation was anything but creditable, her house being a home for young courtesans. Aeschines tells us also that Lycicles, a sheep dealer, a man of low birth and character, by keeping Aspasia company after Pericles' death, came to be a chief man in Athens, and in Plato's Menexenus, though we do not take the introduction as quite serious, still thus much seems to be historical, and she had the repute of being resorted to by many of the Athenians for instruction in the art of speaking. Pericles' inclination for her seems, however, to have rather proceeded from the passion of love. He had a wife that was near of kin to him, who had been married first to Hipponicus, by whom she had Callias, surnamed the Rich. And also she brought Pericles, while she lived with him, 2 sons, Xanthippus and Paralus. Afterwards, when they did not well agree, nor like to live together, he parted with her own consent, to another man, and himself took Aspasia, and loved her with wonderful affection. Every day, both as he went out and as he came in from the marketplace, he saluted and kissed her. In the comedy she goes by the nicknames of the New Omphalia and Deianira, and again is styled Juno. Cratinus, in downright terms, calls her a harlot. To find him a Juno, the goddess of lust, bore that harlot past shame, Aspasia by name. It should seem also that he had a son by her, Eupolis, in his Demi, introduced by Pericles, asking after his safety, and Maronides replying, "My son, he lives, a man he had been long, but that the harlot mother did him wrong." Aspasia, they say, became so celebrated and renowned that Cyrus also, who made war against Artaxerxes for the Persian monarchy, gave her, whom he loved, the best of all his concubines, the name of Aspasia, who before that was called Milto. She was a Phacaan by birth, the daughter of one Hermotimus, and when Cyrus fell in battle, was carried to the king, and had great influence at court. These things coming into my memory as I am writing this story, it would be unnatural for me to admit them. Pericles, however, was particularly charged with having proposed to the assembly the war against the Samians, from favor to the Milesians, upon the entreaty of Aspasia, for the two states were at war for the possession of Criene, and the Samians, getting the better, refused to lay down their arms, and to have the controversy betwixt them decided by arbitration before the Athenians. Pericles, therefore, fitting out a fleet, went and broke up the oligarchical government at Samos, and taking 50 of the principal men of the town as hostages, and many of their children, sent them to the isle of Lemnos, there to be kept, though he had offers, as some relate, of a talent apiece for himself from each one of the hostages, and many other presents from those who were anxious not to have a democracy. Moreover, Pissuthnes, the Persian, one of the king's lieutenants, bearing some goodwill to the Samians, sent him 10,000 pieces of gold to excuse the city. Pericles, however, would receive none of this, but after he had taken that course with the Samians, which he thought fit, and set up a democracy among them, sailed back to Athens. But they, however, immediately revolted, Pissuthnes having privily got away their hostages for them, and provided them with means for the war, whereupon Pericles came out with a fleet a second time against them, and found them not idle nor slinking away, but manfully resolved to try for the dominion of the sea. The issue was that after a sharp sea flight about the island called Tragia, Pericles obtained a decisive victory, having with 44 ships routed 70 of the enemies, 20 of which were carrying soldiers. Together with his victory and pursuit, having made himself master of the port, he laid siege to the Samians and blocked them up, who yet, one way or another, still ventured to make sallies and fight under the city walls. But after that, another great fleet from Athens was arrived, and that the Samians were now shut up, with a close leaguer on every side. Pericles, taking with him 60 galleys, sailed out into the main sea, and with the intention, as most authors give the account, to meet a squadron of Phoenician ships that were coming for the Samians' relief, and to fight them at as great distance as could be from the island. But as Tessimbratus says, I keep putting that in 2 lines, with a design of putting over to Cyprus, which does not seem to be probable, but whichever of the two was his intention, it seems to have been a miscalculation, for on his departure, Melissus, the son of Euthygenus, a philosopher, being at that time general in Samos, despising either the small number of the ships that were left or the inexperience of the commanders, prevailed with the citizens to attack the Athenians, and the Samians, having won the battle, and taking several of the men prisoners, and disabled several of the ships, were masters of the sea, and brought into port all necessaries they wanted for the war, which they had not before. Aristotle says that Pericles had been once before this worsted by this Melissus in a sea fight. The Samians, that they might requite an affront which had before been put on them, branded the Athenians, whom they took prisoners, in their foreheads, with the figure of an owl. The Illuminati uses the owl. Irrelevant side note. For so the Athenians had marked them before with a simana, which is a sort of ship, low and flat in the prow, so as to look snub-nosed, but wide and large, and well spread in the hold, by which it both carries a large cargo and sails well, and it was so called because the first of that kind was seen at Samos, having been built by order of Polycrates the tyrant. These brands upon the Samians' foreheads, they say, are an allusion to the passage of Aristophanes, where he says, "Oh, the Samians are a lettered people." Pericles, as soon as news was brought him of the disaster that had befallen his army, made all the haste he could to come to their relief, and having defeated Melissus, who bore up against him and put the enemy to flight, he immediately proceeded to hem them in with a wall, resolving to master them and take the town rather with some cost and time than with the wounds and hazards of his citizens. But as it was a hard matter to keep back the Athenians, who were vexed at the delay and were eagerly bent to fight, he divided the whole multitude into 8 parts and arranged by lot that part which had the white bean should have leave to feast and take their ease, while the other 7 were fighting. And this is the reason, they say, that people, when at any time they have been merry and enjoyed themselves, called it White Day, in allusion to this white bean. And as a side note, one finds in pretty much every claim of monotheism a ban on tattoos. And Christianity, not being monotheism, has also picked this up. Ephorus, the historian, tells us besides that Pericles made use of engines of battery in the siege, being much taken with the curiousness of the invention, with the aid and presence of Artemon himself, the engineer, who, being lame, used to be carried about in a litter, where the works required his attendance, and for that reason was called Periphoretus. But Heraclides Ponticus disproves this out of Anacreon's poems, where mention is made of this Artemon Periphoretus several ages before the Samnite War are any of these occurrences, and he says that Artemon, being a man who loved his ease and had a great apprehension of danger, for the most part kept close within doors, having 2 of his servants to hold a brazen shield over his head, that nothing might fall upon him from above, and if he were at any time forced upon necessity to go abroad, that he was carried about in a little hanging bed close to the very ground, and for this reason he was called Periphoretus. And sort of a side note, not terribly relevant, but it's important that divorce goes consensually and easy.